if your dashboard has separate charts for all the various KPIs, metrics, conversion rates, you're probably not optimizing it, you're just duplicating it. High-performing analytics teams solve this with something called sheet swapping and metric swapping, where a single chart dynamically changes based on what the user selects. Hi, I'm Nate, and I've worked in the data industry for 8+ years. And this is one of those things that can definitely tell the difference between a novice Tableau user and dashboard developer to an experienced one. So today I'm going to show you just how to do that. Right now, I just built out a pretty straightforward dashboard, which uses the look e-commerce data from BigQuery. From here, I just have this data imported over through like CSV. So we're just visualizing the data over here, where we have orders over time, which is just the count distinct of created when the order was created at. And then we have the order status. This is just a basic pie chart with the distribution of different various order statuses. Now, if I was working with a team that wanted to understand just how our orders are doing on a day-to-day, week-by-week basis, then this is just fine, right? This can probably service the various of other things that you want to report on. But if you want to make sure that your dashboards are relatively clean and just make it more user-friendly, this is one of the ways that you can help just provide more context and detail than just like the various single line charts that you have over here, or just the various other metrics that are aligned over here. So the first thing that we'll do is something called metric swapping. So right now we have orders that are being displayed over here. But what if I want to view something different? Maybe by a different metric, perhaps by users, without having just to provide just a chart below. So this is how we do that. So what we do is we select the metric that we want to create. So right now we're looking at orders, like I said, but maybe we want to look at the metrics by users. So let's go ahead and create that metric real quick. Actually, this over here. We're just going to grab the count distinctive user ID. We're going to call this users. And as you notice, I've already created the orders calculation, pretty similar, except we're taking the order ID. Then what we're going to do is we're going to create two things. One is something called a parameter, and then another essentially metric that we're going to throw in here into the rows section. So parameter is kind of like a single select. So in this case, we can use a string or integer value, but in this example, we'll just use a string value. And we're going to call it just metric. And you can provide a list of values. So in this case, right, I want to provide just the value. It doesn't really matter what the value is, but in this case, just to be like very clear, let's use orders. And let's just add in users right here. So these are kind of like the set values that we're going to use in the new calculated field that we're just creating. So I'll create this metric as metric swapper, and we're going to use a case statement here. So case, and case statements or any of like the logic in Tableau, right? It has its own like semantic meaning. It's pretty similar to roughly SQL. It's not 100% there, but you know, if you use SQL or like Google Sheets or Excel, you'll probably notice that like a lot of the logic, like semantically or just idealistically, it's going to be pretty similar, one way or another. And you can always Google it or just search on ChatGPT or whatever AI tool you use. So we're going to say case. Let's see here, metrics, which is the name of the parameter we created. When orders, right, that's the value that we provided in the parameter. And then the same thing for users. And this is the users calculated field we just created right down here. And if we're good with that, close it out with then we should be good to go. Usually I try to make sure that I add in some like level of indentation just to clean it up, but we're on Tableau Public, so it's not always the most easiest thing to do. So let's go ahead or not Tableau Public, but Tableau Online. So it's not always the easiest thing to do. So we'll leave it as is. Cool. And what we're going to do is instead of, we're going to replace orders with metric swapper over here. Cool. You notice that the values haven't changed because the default value for this parameter is our orders. So if we were to switch it, you can't really tell too much because there isn't much of a difference, but we are now going to be using orders. And then we can actually double check that too, right? So say for, I believe this is the week of March 2nd, 2025. We have, this is users, so 701 users, metric swapper has 701. Meanwhile, orders will have 703, as you can see over here. And then metric swapper has 701 because it's set to users. So after just checking that real quick, I think we should be good to go. And one other thing that people often will forget is that you can update the y-axis. So instead of just being metric swapper, you can actually use the value. So this is the value of the parameter. So if it's set to users, then it'll just reflect users right here. And it'll dynamically update. Cool. And likewise, we can do that with the tooltip just to make sure it's cleaned. So let's go ahead and do the same thing. Insert parameters.metrics, right? And then it'll show the value here. So orders, and then it'll update to users. And then we should be good to go. Cool. So that's metric swapping. I'll show you another instance of metric swapping that actually is pretty beneficial. So maybe, we want to see perhaps, for example, orders by gender, right? Yeah, which is like a pretty solid view, right? If someone's interested in doing more of a deep dive analysis, but what if sometimes I want to see gender, sometimes I don't. Maybe I want to see by all, or perhaps I want to see by just a different cut. Maybe status in this example might work. Yes. Maybe by status. So we can actually do like kind of something similar, metric swapping, but for the group by part, to like stratify by colors or stratify or group by anything else. So what we can do is kind of something similar. So I'm going to create a parameter called, let's go call it group by. So there are three things I want to group by. One is just by all, right? So that's just not going to, oh, sorry, this is a floating string. All, so this will just not, group by anything, and it'll just show you the orders over time. And then let's do gender. Let's do status. And then we should be good to go from there. So all gender status. All right, let's go create that calculate field. I want to also name this just group by. Some people have a preference to, right? They're kind of encompassing names, group by for parameter, group by for metric. But for me, it kind of works because then for me, it's very clear, like a parameter is very distinct versus something that's a calculated field. So, all right, so case, we're gonna do group by, right? Because like within the case statement, we're searching for specific values within group by, which is that parameter we just created. What is it? Gender. You have to make sure the values match 100% here. So this was capitalized in the beginning. So as the first letter of the word. So when gender, then gender is just the value return, just that string value. And then let's do status. Return that status as well. And then I'm going to add an end, and then I need to, doesn't really matter where you add it, but just for like consistency. Then let's see, should be when all, then true. Is that right? You know what? Yeah, you just pass in a single value. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yep, yep, yeah. Okay, cool. Looks good. Sweet. All right. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to replace status right here. Then as you can see, this is kind of going back to the original view that we had. And the reason being is that the parameter is set to by default to all. So let's go ahead and show parameter. And now if someone wants to do like a more like deep dive analysis, right? They're not just kind of stuck looking at one view. Now they can look at three separate views. And if you weren't doing this, then there might be other ways of going about it, but you'd probably create three separate charts for something that's more or less like the similar view or of data that you're looking at. So that is essentially sheet swap, or sorry, metric swapping. And let me also, just to tidy up, let me add in those parameters we just created. Here. Cool. Yeah, so as you can see, right, like this really helps from an end user perspective, whoever's using it, like supply chain, finance, whoever is looking at this data, there's a lot of flexibility as to how someone can do their own like deep dive analysis here instead of just like one kind of like solid view and just adding a few filters. Cool. All right, so the last thing I want to review with you is sheet swapping. So sheet swapping, kind of similar concept to metric swapping, is that we want to dynamically update something. In this case, instead of the metric, we're gonna go ahead and just like swap out the whole visual itself. There's some benefits to this. Kind of similar concept is just to help prevent just making like a blown up view of all of the sheets, all of the different visuals in one dashboard, and just make it consolidated. It also provides more insight and analysis, more deeper insight and analysis as well. Uh, you can imagine that someone who has just like two visuals but does a lot of stuff versus having like 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 visuals, and they get a little bit flustered because there's a lot of stuff going on. And perhaps the person who's looking at it at the dashboard is not as familiar with like Tableau and how to use it and stuff like that. So being able just to consolidate all this information in one space, I think, is quite beneficial for someone who's not the one that's building it out. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and duplicate this sheet, and we'll just create another visual, nothing too complex. Let's see here, just right off the cuff. Yeah, so perhaps we want to change this visual for whatever reason. Instead of a pie chart, people don't like pie charts. Maybe we can do something different. So let's go ahead and change it to maybe like a distribution, perhaps. This one looks all right. I'm gonna actually revert back on this one. This one looks all right too. Not to spend too much time, let's go ahead and just break it out into a tabular view, and we can always change this later. So it has the percent of total orders and then just the actual orders associated with it. So there's two ways to sheet swap. One is a bit of a cleaner way than the other. So I'll go ahead and do like the less clean way and then do the more clean way. Pick and choose, but I think the latter is going to be probably more just easier to do. And from a formatting perspective, it's a little bit, like I say, a little bit cleaner to implement. So what we can do is we can create. You'll start to notice the trend parameter, and let's just call it sheet swapping for now. We can always change it later. Uh, sheet swap, just name it that. Same thing. You can name it like you can have it like a float integer, probably integer or string. But let's go ahead and just use string for now. It's going to be just a little bit easier to remember. So there's value and display as. So value. Let's just name what was the first one pie chart. I mean, you can typically probably add something a little more descriptive, like yeah, pie chart. And what I'm going to do is just display as. It's going to be a little bit different. So it's going to be like percent of total orders. Cool. And that was the pie chart. And then this one I was just like tabular view. And then I'll go ahead and just name this, yeah, keep it as tabular view. All right, cool. So we have that there. Let's go ahead and display this. And then we are going to create a value for this. So what we can do is let's go ahead and name this sheet swap filter. And then let's go ahead and do case statement, case sheet swap when say pie chart. Then let's do. So this is where you can return any value, right? You can be like 1, 2, pie chart, so on and so forth. In this case, I'm going to change it up a little bit. I'm going to just like return the value 1, and you'll see why in a second. So when tabular view, then I'm just going to give this 2. And cool. So tabular view is going to be 2. So when I add this filter here, let's actually make sure I add this as a dimension, convert to dimension. Cool. And then you'll notice that it only has 1, and that's because right now we're just the value's set to percent total orders. So what we can do is just there's a couple ways, but one of it is custom value list, and then just kind of force 2. Yeah, I just want to add 2, and then this will disappear. All right, I'm gonna rename this. So as you can see, we have the pie chart still. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna check if this is in a horizontal container. Yes, it is. Okay, cool. The reason why I checked is that we're gonna add in pretty much 2 sheets in kind of one section, like that. Right, which the tabular view currently has nothing because the parameter is set to the pie chart. And then what we want to do is just get rid of the title, and it'll pretty much close out. But you see, there's some like there's a slight space, a gap. So oftentimes you can't tell, but sometimes you can. It just depends on what you're kind of building out. Cool. And we want to do the same thing for this, otherwise it's not going to hide. All right, cool. We got that there, and then let me share the share the filter or parameter. Oh, I need to add it here. That's right. Okay, cool. All right, and then year 1. Just gonna force it here. Cool. All right, and then now it should sheet swap. So you can go ahead and Now we have the parameter, which is it's up here. Let's add that right here. All right. And this is where you can kind of see the issue. That's not super clean view. Yeah, yeah. So this is one way, but again, as you can see, it's not a super clean view. So I'll show you the actual method. That's a lot more cleaner. All right, cool. So I'm going to add back in the title because I think that's important. I'm going to add that title back in. All right, cool. Yeah, let's go there with that. All right, so what you need to do is let's get rid of this sheet swap filter. We don't really need it for this one. All right. So what we're going to do is we are going to create a filter, and then we are going to essentially just like say, hey, if this is the pie chart, that's true, like else false. So let's go ahead and just name this filter pie chart. And then kind of similar, right? We're going to do case sheet swap. Equals pie chart. Then true, false. And let's see. There we go. Cool. And then we should get to go from there. And we're actually not going to add this here because we're actually going to add this somewhere else. So let's go ahead and do the same thing for the tabular view. Tabular view. All right, we're good to go. So back to the dashboard, you're going to get this menu over here, and you'll see that there's a few things: show title, floating, and then the other one is control visibility using value. So this is what we're going to use right here. So control visibility using value, and then you notice that, okay, now there's a couple things that we can add, and this is the things that we just created. Filter pie chart, which is that case statement, just telling if it's a pie chart or not, right, based off of the parameter over here. And likewise with the other one, tabular view, right? So tabular view right here. All right, so make sure you select the right one. So right now I have selected the pie chart, as you can see over here. Control pie chart. All right, we should be good to go there. And then let's go ahead and do the same thing for this one right here. Tabular view. All right, cool. You notice that it completely disappeared. At least, from the dashboard perspective, it looks like it did. And then you can see there's no gap or anything. And when we choose this value in the parameter, now it fully swaps on over. So that is how you do pretty clean sheet swap. So I'm gonna go ahead and publish now because sometimes Tableau, especially Tableau Online, is fun to deal with. And let's go ahead and just look at the final product. All right, cool. So here's the final product. Got the filter right here. Looks like that didn't change, so it probably needs to be applied to the other visual. Yeah, looks like this case. And then you can see that, okay, well, looking at users, maybe I just want to switch to orders. I can. I set up a different parameter to do the date granularity. Right here. Perspective, different metrics we can group by. So, right, we essentially just force like all string, and then it just won't stratify anything. Gender, right? We are just when the parameter value is gendered, then it'll return the gender field. And then same thing with status over here. And then to recap over here, so we have the initial sheet, which is just like the pie chart. And then now we can essentially swap the visual. And this is really important because say someone wants to do like an analysis, but they don't want like, you don't want to create like 20 different dashboards or sheets. That's quite an exaggeration, but just to kind of like reduce the amount of just stuff that you create, from from all like the dashboard tabs, you can just kind of consolidate into one and just kind of like build it out by themes essentially. So if there's like one thing that is totally different than the other, then probably it might warrant to have its own. But in this case, right, since we're looking at orders, and someone maybe doesn't want the pie chart, they just want to actually to view the actual numbers, then they can do that here because it's kind of under the same theme. Cool. That's a quick recap of essentially creating metric swapping parameters and sheet swapping parameters and making your dashboard just totally dynamic. If you liked the video, please go ahead and subscribe. It definitely would mean a lot to me. I anticipate to post weekly videos about not just like Tableau and all of that, but around SQL, working out of data warehouses like BigQuery, Snowflake, and working with DBT. So yeah, go ahead and click that like button. Thanks. Next time.